Hello everyone, Dr. Chris Martenson of Peak Prosperity here. We have a very special interview for you today, and a lot of you wonder about what's my life like, what's it been like, and all the time we get questions too about how are the younger generations processing everything that we talk about. So you're in for a treat. We got to kill two birds with that one stone today, and today we have Erica Martenson with us today. Erica, there is a rumor going around that we are related.
Yeah, you can't tell.
Is there any truth to this rumor?
There's some truth. There's some truth.
Really? Tell us about that. How do you process that rumor?
Well, I was thinking on my drive over, I was like, what are the stories people would actually like to hear about Chris Martenson? What was it like being his daughter? What was it like growing up in his house? And it's fun because I can kind of segment my childhood into all these different chapters, you know? So there's the mystic segment where we were living a very different...
Mystic Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Not mystic the practice.
Not mystic the practice. No, not yet anyways.
Not yet. Foreshadowing.
Yeah,
like
a little foreshadowing there. But so there's the mystic chapter where we were just living the kind of, American dream, quote unquote. And... But I was thinking, the transition into a very different lifestyle is where the story really gets interesting.
Sure.
For me, anyways.
All right, we'll backfill with those cool stories, but so people have context.
Sure.
What's your life like today? Explain. Are you an account executive working in Boston selling Nike shoes?
Yeah, actually, I tried to go down that route. They didn't like me, because I don't own any clothes that don't have holes in them, so I didn't fit in there, but no, so I live on a farm in western Massachusetts. I live in a tiny house that I like to say my partner and I built, but, he did 98% of it. So I helped. I held the windows, while he was installing them. And I live a just really beautiful, simple life, We've got cows, we've got sheep on the farm there, we've got chickens, we've got a big veggie garden. And I feel really lucky that I am not doing it alone. I've got my partner there, and then there's another couple that lives there with us, and so it's not a solo operation there.
No, you make it sound like the four of you. Every time I've been there seems to be like a dozen people.
Well, we're nestled within a much, a more robust community.
Yeah.
So it really is. That's one of my favorite things about living there is that you walk outside and there's always some neighbor coming by, or, it feels very like another era, maybe like 70s or 80s or something, where the neighborhood kids are just biking by, and one of them has his fishing pole, like he's like trying to balance it as he's biking, and so it's beautiful, and that's honestly my favorite part about it.
So in many respects, you're actually living a life that's indistinguishable from the Little House on the Prairie series.
Well,
Sorta.
Yes, there was some foreshadowing there too. As you know, I was deeply obsessed as a child, to put it lightly. And, I was lucky because my best friends were just as nerdy and obsessed as I was. So we would dress up in our, little aprons and, overalls, and would go outside and we would play for hours and hours and hours, and just kind of in this imaginal world, which now I'm essentially living as an adult.
You have a cow.
I do.
Do you milk the cow?
I do milk the cow.
You milk the cow.
Although I'm not milking her right now because she's pregnant, so.
Okay.
There will be milking, though.
And when you get
year.
the milk, what do you do with the milk?
Well, we went through a very deep dive into cheese making last year. And so we were making, mozzarella and Gouda and cheddar, and we're really just getting into that whole world. They're so good. They're so good.
I've never made cheese.
Okay, we'll have to do that sometime.
It sounds difficult.
It's not. It's actually way more simple than you think, and it's the most amazing, tiny little minute differences in the heat of the water or how much rennet you add will create an entirely different cheese. It's the coolest thing. It's like magic.
I always thought like to go to get a Gouda, a mozzarella, or a cheddar,
Yeah.
there must have been like different bacteria or yeast or something involved. But nah,
No,
it's just the processing.
it's just the process, and just tiny little differences will create a totally different cheese. And that's where it's tricky, because I'm learning out of books and off of YouTube, and so
Uh-huh.
it's a gamble every single time, but so far
Yep.
it's paid off.
All right, so you've made cheese, you've raised animals. Do you process your own animals?
We do, yep. So we raised pigs last year, which are now in the freezer, and it's just like the most delicious pork I've ever eaten in my life. We've done meat birds. We have a cow who will probably end up in the freezer.
This was your cow's baby. Yeah.
Yes. And that one, I mean, raising your own animals, it's not easy, because you really
No.
do build these relationships with them, and you really love them. And I think that's part of what makes it that much more meaningful when you do actually end up eating them, because it's like there's this actual connection to it that
Yeah.
you just have this deeper appreciation for it that you just don't get from, McDonald's hamburger.
So the tiny home, a lot of people dream about that. You actually built one. How do you like it?
I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, I feel like I was kind of prepared for it over my life. I grew up going to this island off the coast of Maine where it was, log cabin, no running water, no electricity. So living in a tiny house that does have running water and electricity feels like palatial, Lap of luxury.
And it sounds like roughing it, but the island in Maine is anything but roughing it,
Yes.
even though it doesn't have running water or electricity.
Oh my
right?
God.
It's just a way of living. And so one of those stories from childhood, I remember we were in the midst of one of our many third world experiences here in America where our power was out in Montague, Massachusetts, and it was out for like a 5-day stretch. And most people are paralyzed, right? They start smelling by day 2 because they haven't been able to shower and things are happening. And I remember a friend of mine came over. It's pitch dark in our house. We have some hurricane lanterns lit, and you kids are busy doing dishes in the sink. And he's like, what's happening? How did what happened? How are you doing dishes? And so we just did what we did at the island, right? You kids like, okay, somebody heated up some water.
Yeah.
You can do that even without a functioning stove, right?
Yeah.
There's a way to heat water. And you just get a couple of bins. But the fact was you were all just doing that. And the dishes were getting done. And it wasn't like a
Oh shit.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't a
yeah.
moment. It was
Yeah.
just happening.
Yeah.
And that was magic to this person. They were like, oh my gosh, it was like they were looking into like an advanced culture.
Right. Right. Well, that's what's so cool is like growing up, like learning those like very basic skills. It's like when you encounter a problem like that, it's like, oh, the solution is just in me, There's
Yeah.
not a panic moment of I have to solve this. It's just like, okay, I'll just go pump some water from the well and whatever, build a fire, whatever.
So now in your life too, we mentioned sort of the physical aspects and some animals. What's your friend group like? Are you an outlier in your friend group of living in a tiny home and farming?
Well, no, I mean, I definitely live in a subculture that is very different from the mainstream. I was laughing about this the other day with a friend where we were like, I don't think I know a single person my age who is doing the kind of traditional 9-to-5 office job. Like everybody is either, I have a friend who's running rites of passage for teenage boys. I have a friend who's deep into mushroom cultivation and has a mushroom cultivation business, and friends who are farmers, and friends who are really growing into like trades, carpentry and electricians. And so, but yeah, we were cracking up. We're like, I literally cannot think of a single person who I'm like close with in my life who's choosing that route.
Is that unusual, do you think? Is this just like you belong to a unusual subculture, or?
I mean, I think so. This is like sacrilegious in this day and age, but I don't have Wi-Fi in my house. I do not own a laptop. So I'm not super plugged into the mainstream, but I would, guess that it's pretty rare. But I do think that there is, you know, it feels like there's like a movement towards that way of life, that feels like there's some sort of hunger for that or longing for it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, the feedback I get is that a lot of people are hungering for exactly the details of your life, right? Which is you're learning skills, you're doing things, you have a tendency to just figure stuff out.
Oh, am I not allowed to swear on this?
No, we can swear. You
Okay.
figure shit out, okay? Fuck.
Okay.
So,
I was like, oh God.
no,
I
it's
think
not
I've sworn
that.
like 20 times already, probably.
Oops. No, don't worry about it. We're amongst friends and
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
So let's, but I get the sense that so I get emails all the time. So let me tell you about one I just got. I haven't responded to yet.
Okay.
Guy says, hey, I'm 26 years old. I can't do this thing anymore, which is probably the 9-to-5 job. He's in LA, threw himself, out there and said, I don't really have any skills, but I know I desperately need them. Is there any place for me, on your farm that I have going here? And so I think I get emails like that all the time. People are looking for two things. They're looking for a way to apply themselves to this new future they think is coming, and they think it involves new skills beyond being an account executive at Nike or whatever they're doing, right? And secondarily, they're looking for community.
Yeah.
Those are both things I'm positive you have in spades at this point in time. How did that happen?
I mean, yeah, I've thought about this, and it's like, it wasn't for me anyways, it wasn't really a conscious choice. I think so much of it was the way I was raised and where I was raised. And so it just kind of organically unfolded, where I was like, I knew from age 8 that I wasn't interested in some sort of office job or computer work, or I knew that wasn't my calling, and I wonder if it's anyone's actual calling, but maybe it is.
No, I think increasingly not. The data says that after millions and millions of people had to stay home because of the pandemic, they're not going back to work. So right now we have these massive worker shortages. It turns out people don't want to come back to their jobs.
Right,
as
you get a
truckers,
taste of something
as
different.
nurses, as whatever it is. So a lot of what we're experiencing in terms of the shortages, which we can talk about in a bit, which are pandemic in our country right now, is because they just can't get people to work. Those poor fast food restaurants were like, how come we can't hire people back at $8 an hour?
Yeah, right.
Probably because they're
I wonder
earning
why.
18 to stay home. So that's not going to work out. But
right, they don't want to go to work and be like abused all day. Weird.
No, it's
so
weird. And it's even beyond just the strict pay. You need pay to survive, I guess, but it's the soul destroying aspect of the jobs that are meaningless and purposeless.
Yeah.
As the main problem. And I think once people got enough separation from that, they're like, I ain't going back.
Right.
Once you break the illusion, it's over, baby. It's like, don't want it.
Yep, it's the fish and water thing, and now you've gotten a chance to be out of it and see the water, and it's like, oh fuck, I don't want to be back in that. Like, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so you knew from an early age, maybe not an office job, but I was working an office job when you were 8.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't make it look that appealing?
Yeah. Didn't look awesome.
Didn't look awesome? Okay. Say more.
Well, it's funny because we were living... Have you ever, painted the picture of where we were in Mystic for people?
Not totally.
Okay.
I just gave them the before and after story. I had a boat and sort of corporate lifestyle, waterfront home, but not really painting the picture.
Yeah. So, Mystic is a fairly ritzy area, right?
It's a Gold Coast town, sort of.
Yep, exactly. We were living in, how many square feet was the house?
Like 5,000.
It's a huge house for me, living in 300 square feet now, literally. So, yeah, we were living in this just to me, a mansion, but we never really fit in there. You know what I mean? I'm thinking of this one particular photo from childhood where me and my siblings are in front of this mansion and we are completely coated in mud from head to toe, like bless you and Mom for trying to keep us somewhat presentable in that area, because
Mm-hmm.
it was an
It didn't work
uphill
out.
battle. Yeah. So, but then to kind of get the taste of what that lifestyle felt like, to then transition to this farm. I mean, we moved to this tiny little farmhouse where you could vacuum every room from the same outlet, and
Mm-hmm.
we got chickens. And
I remember because tragically the TV got broken in the move.
oh no, how
It
did
got
that happen?
broken.
Oh,
It
hey,
never-
wait, did it get broken? Oh my God, this is like when you learn Santa's not real.
The TV got broken, and
okay.
somehow we just never quite replaced it.
Huh, weird.
That was actually one of the best moves we ever made.
Definitely. Props. Nice
Yep.
job. Because we literally were out, like me and Simon and Grace
Yeah.
were outside all day, every day. And that was also when we transitioned to homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing these nature programs every week that completely shaped my life. I mean, I'm running nature programs now.
So you say nature programs, I think a lot of people listening think, oh, we're going to learn to identify oak trees.
That's part of it.
That's part of it,
That's-
but it's more than that.
Yeah.
So what's the nature program about, really?
Well, when I was a kid, it was kind of, there was a lot of that tree identification, food, like wild foods, a lot of bow drill and hand drill. That's like primitive fire technologies, if
Mhm.
folks don't know. There was a lot of like, where do you find water on the landscape? How do you build natural shelters? And I loved it. It was just the most freeing thing, to go from public school to just getting to play. And I've always been like a nature nerd, so
Yeah.
that was just right up my alley.
But pretty deep skills that go beyond just sort of like sort of the rote memorization of this. Here's the different types of trees.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories is a rite of passage at a certain age of this was to spend a night outdoors all by yourself, and they would
Mhm.
just send you out into the woods with what you had on your back.
Mhm.
And I remember you came back from one of those. I think it was your first one or maybe your second one. I can't remember, but the story was. You go out, you build a debris shelter, and this is October sometime, right? So
Yeah,
it could be
in Vermont.
raining, it's
Yeah.
in Vermont. I mean, it could be really cold,
Yep.
and it was a few years. So I asked you, were you cold? You're like, no, I made a fire. Like, I thought you weren't supposed to do that. Did you bring a match with you? And you said, no, they didn't take my shoelaces away. So to connect those dots for people listening, it is possible to go from shoelaces to fire. How is that possible?
Oh, I completely forgot about that. Yep. Shoelace becomes the string on the bow,
Mhm.
which then wraps around the spindle, which is like the upright part of the kit. And then you basically use the bow to spin that spindle really fast, create a lot of friction, creates dust in the bottom board, the fireboard. That dust compacts, gets wicked, wicked hot. Like, I think it's like 900 degrees or something for bow drill, and compresses and becomes a little coal. And then you put that into a bundle of tinder and blow it into flames. So, yeah, they didn't take my shoelaces.
So
Shouldn't have taught us how to do bow drill if they didn't want
So,
us making fire.
I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. So we come from a fairly traditional family. My family's got bankers going back a long way on the
Mhm.
Canandaigua side of this story. My grandfather was president of a bank, and his father and his father. So it's a very long family lineage, and I have uncles and other family members still, operating the bank. So at any rate, one of the family rites of passages was you kids each got a small allotment of this Canandaigua stock, which has this thing called a dividend. So I remember the day clearly. And this is a story about how kids actually are absorbing more than you
Yeah.
think. Right.
Oh my God.
So I remember this day because for me, an important part of growing up was that day you got your first bank account. You have this little passbook and there's like a number in it. And it's an important thing, right? I remember my mom bringing me to the bank and getting my first bank account. So I'm ready to transmit this family legacy moment, proud moment. I sit you three kids down. I think you're probably 12, 8, and 6 or something like that. Like you're pretty young. And so I explained the whole thing. You guys are like really, you love the idea of magic money showing up in the mail. That sounds cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and we're going to go open bank accounts. I explained the whole bank account thing, and I just stand aside because I'm ready for all 3 kids to rush out the door, and we're all excited. And you just all sit there looking at me. I was like, what's wrong? And you said, well, what if the bank goes bankrupt? What happens to my money? And then Simon, the middle, says, I'd rather have silver. And Grace said, yeah, me too. So I didn't realize you were all listening as I railed to your mom about banks and precious metals. And I think that was so so much for that family moment, right? Chirping crickets. You just looked at me like a dog listening to white noise. You're like, why would I put my money in a bank?
That sounds weird. It's kind of sus. I don't know.
And so it began.
And so it began. Yep, and I remember when you gave me my first piece of silver. I remember that, the Walking Liberty. This beautiful coin.
Yeah.
There's just something about the weight of it and the sound when you flick it in the air. And I just was like,
so
let's talk like real
Let's
money.
talk about treasure, because one of the things I did specifically raising you kids was
oh my God.
Making sure that nothing, whatever you got was actually earned, right? So there was a treasure hunt, though, that sort of unfolded at this island. And it was an 11-year-long treasure hunt, if I have my numbers right.
That's correct.
Tell us about that. What do you remember about that? Because that started when you were pretty young.
This is like, I will tell you, this is a core memory for me. This was like, this really stuck out, the moment of finding that bottle specifically. So we were on a hike, right? We were on a walk with this family friends that were with us. And
on this fairly deserted island.
Deserted island. We're walking. It's like a beautiful day. It's like foggy, and we're walking along the beach, and I think it was somebody. I think it was you. You said, like, guys, look, there's a snake, and I think it was like 8. I think it was about 8 years old, maybe 7. And my friends and I gathered around. We're like, "Where's the snake, Dad?" And you're like, oh, it must have gone. But then we were like, wait, there's a bottle there buried in the side of this hill. Like, oh, my God, And we were just over the moon. We were so psyched. And then we pulled it out, and it had this burned, stained, wrinkled old, note in it. And that's... that led us down yes, you're right, 11-year-long...
I remember when that note was found, my experience was that you kids got so excited that your emanations moved out of my hearing range up into like where dogs could hear.
Dogs were barking on other islands. Exactly. And I, like, bless you, I do not know how you did this, how you kept it under wraps for so long. I mean, for years we were convinced that Bill Tree Reed, the guy who had signed this note, the guy who had drowned off the coast of this island,
which is a real story.
Real story. This was the best friend of my great grandfather, I believe.
You have to root these things in
it was
reality.
A real thing. So we found it, his name. We did all this research. We found stories about him in these old like newspaper records and all that stuff. So we were fully sold.
And the note talked about treasure, though.
And the note talked about treasure. So, well, I mean, that was it. We spent the next 11 summers.
So I remember you guys are young. You're like 8, 6, 5, 4,
Something
2,
like
whatever.
that,
Right? You're all young, and of course, there were the parents involved who set this whole thing up. Like we had to have this conversation because they really wanted to we should just show them where this is. And I was like, nope.
Yeah.
And so you guys didn't find that treasure that first year.
Sure didn't.
Next year you came back. There's the little note up on the shelf. You all pulled it down.
It's still there.
You would scatter into the woods trying to decode the messages on it. Didn't find it the second year.
Oh my God. And we tried all of these different tactics to get, because like once we were like, I want to say like 13, we were like starting to like, this smells like bullshit. I got you to I remember this, I got you to sign something and I compared your signature to the handwriting and I was like, I got it. It's him,
Well, my favorite moment of trying to play gotcha is all of you kids stormed in. You were pissed as hell. It's nighttime. There's a fire going. You're all mad. And you said, we're done. And you took that note, which was very carefully made with little
Yeah.
burned edges and tea stained, and,
Yeah.
and you threw it into the fire and said, we're done with your stupid story.
That's right.
And that was trying to get us to break. But of course, what you kids had done was mocked up an exact copy of this thing.
You better believe I wrote every word of that down. I burned the edges to match the other one perfectly. Like, we spent a long time staining it, and doing it so that you wouldn't see that we were pouring the tea to stain it, It was a long process, and I think our acting skills were pretty good
they
that
were
day. 'Cause
very
we
good.
almost got Mom to crack. I swear to God.
Almost got Mom to
We
crack.
were so close.
But we didn't crack.
And so another 6 years went
year,
by.
So, but every summer, though, this was actually a point of focus, was to drag that map out
Oh, yeah.
and to keep looking. And we just let it run. And then there was the 11th year.
Oh, man. It was so beautiful. What did you use? You used some sort of like disappearing ink on the back, which, oh my God. Was that just lemon juice? What was that?
Yeah, it was lemon juice.
Lemon juice. Okay, so we heat this thing up very delicately. I don't even remember how we figured out how to do this. Heat it up in a frying pan. Like magic, these words appear, that guide us to the point where we're supposed to go. We're freaking out because it's been 11 years to this moment, and we are so fucking dumb. How did we not heat it up sooner? Like, God. Okay, so we go to this place, and we're tromping around, and it's this beautiful thick layer of moss the whole island is covered in, and we're stomping around. We're looking for hours. We're like, I know we're in the right zone, but it's also been a long time. Like, it's probably totally overgrown. Like, how the hell are we going to find this thing? And we had a friend with us who he was stomping around. He was getting frustrated, more and more frustrated, till finally he just like threw his shovel down, and we just heard this clink, and we just stopped. There's that beautiful electric moment of silence where we all just looked at each other like, wait, did you hear? That wasn't rock. Like, that was metal, and then we started screaming and finally unearthed this treasure. So, my God, what a saga.
And there was actual treasure in there.
Bravo, there was.
Yes.
There was silver. There was, like, beautiful jewelry. Yep. I was a little worried that it was going to be, like, 11-year-old lollipops.
Yeah, some
because he used to do
Twizzlers.
that. Yeah, some, like, whatever, moldy Tootsie Rolls. But real treasure.
There was real treasure in there. Yeah. So, and that's, I pushed hard to say, no, we need to let them work this out, right? Because I actually believe in that as a parenting style, is when you actually work through something by yourself, it has a different meaning and it becomes yours. It's not about us doing something. So that became your kids' like whole thing, and it's a shared memory, and it belongs to you now, right? And so we containered it, but the rest was out of our hands.
And what a better story than, if you guys had spilled the beans and we found it that same day. I probably would have forgotten it, but, to have it be this long, epic, beautiful process,
Yep. And served our purposes, because you kids would be out stomping around digging
Yeah,
holes
exactly.
all over the island.
I'm noting that. That's genius.
Just
Parents,
let that run.
take note. Just file that one away if you ever want your kids out of the house.
But as well, I worked hard, too, to... I remember you kids had to work hard to figure out when I was lying, because if you would ask me something, my default response would be to either tell you the truth or tell you enough truth that it was truthy, or to just outright BS the whole situation. Because I actually wanted critical thinking. I think it's one of the things I value most highly in my life is the ability to say, oh, somebody's telling me something. How am I going to receive this? And should I just trust this? Right? And so, yeah, I remember probably somewhere around, for each of you, between the ages of 8 and 10, you'd start to decode, like, okay, when he's got his tongue over to the side, he must be...
He's looking to the left.
He's looking to the left. He must
Ooh. I think we made a list of those, like, tell signs. It's probably buried somewhere. That'd be pretty good to pull out, though. See if it's still true.
So all of which is just part of where you are now. And so as you take all of those skills and learnings and your upbringing and everything, how do you see the world today? from a widen the lens way up. Like from your perspective at your age, you look into this thing we call our current situation. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, obviously, growing up with you as my dad and listening to you record the crash course in your tiny little sweaty office. I kind of grew up with this sense of like, this all feels like some sort of facade. It doesn't feel, this story that you can just work hard and save a lot of money and, buy a house and save for retirement. The
arc.
The cultural myth that we're operating on just always felt like BS,
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think I'm obviously, I grew up as your daughter, and so I kind of grew up with that, just seeing it as a story, rather than just the objective truth, and also just the growing up, and especially when we were in Mystic, growing up and just seeing like the way people were operating when they were kind of in the water of the mother culture, like Daniel
How would
Quinn
you describe
says. that? Well, it's just this. There's like a lot of different threads to it, but I think it's just if you do A and B and C, you will be happy, something like that. But I just never actually saw that playing out.
Mm-hmm.
With just this story of you're only as valuable as you are productive. You are going to be ostracized and shamed and outcast if you don't fit into this cultural narrative. Just all of that has never sat right with me. And I think that was like why as a child I was like so entrenched in these like older ways of living, where I was just like, I was actually I just was rereading those books because there's actually a lot of like information in there about how do you spin wool and blah blah blah. So, but just reading them and reading about the ridiculous amount of skills these people had to live, like they were literally, this guy, that her father was the hunter and the tanner, and her mother made all of their clothing, which is insane to me as someone who works with fibers a lot. That is like Herculean, that amount of effort goes into that, growing all of their food. Everybody in not that long ago had way more skills, like actual skills to live than I would say most people have today.
And I think these skills inform each other. So if you have to learn how to use a hammer, you learn something about momentum. And if you have to use the other side of the hammer, you learn something about leverage. And if you have to put an animal down, you learn something about life, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I mean, but they coalesce. So when I was down at Joel Salatin's farm and seeing his son and his all the people there working with them, it's just astonishing to me. Like anywhere you went and you asked them something, there was a whole story under it.
Yeah.
And we were probably just getting the tip of that story.
Sure.
Right? But everything from how you motivate and incentivize people, what kind of contracts you would write, how you put fences in, how you would think about hydrology, where you make roads. Like there was no end to it, 2 solid days of them just sharing as fast as they could, and we barely scratched the surface of this thing. But if you walk on there, you could feel it, because the whole place is sort of operating in a way, and there's an intelligence to the interaction and interplay.
Yeah.
And that's very different from being a super specialist where, all is one tiny piece of the overall story that comes together to make what you would call your sustenance system.
Right.
Right.
And I think that just happens naturally when you're really just getting your hands dirty, and and it's funny because you can pick any skill and it kind of branches out into everything else. Like I've been learning how to weave these baskets for a few years now, And, it's not just learning the art of weaving the basket to weave it.
Can
I
I
have
see
to,
that?
yeah.
When did you make this one?
I think I finished that one a year and a half ago.
My instinct is to go bury this at an Anasazi site. And
Narragansett, actually, they're the ones that made that style.
Narragansett. So put this at a dig and let an anthropologist dig it up, and just this would go in a museum. There'd be a little tag under it.
Well, the cool thing about those is they do last for, like, they've dug up ones that are like 400, 500 years old.
It's beautiful.
They just last forever. But, to weave this basket, I have to know, there's 2 different types of fibers in here, and I have to know which type of tree this fiber comes from. When do I peel the bark off so that I can extract the fibers? How do I extract the fibers? How do I store them? I had to learn how to carve this particular type of device to store my cordage on, So it really is that type of thing where you pick one seemingly like small skill and it just branches out into everything else.
But what made you start?
Well, I was doing this term never like encompasses what it is, but I was doing a naturalist program, an adult one, with the man who taught me how to weave these baskets. And I saw him weaving, and I had actually been watching him weave these for a few years, and they always caught my eye, and I was always like, there's something so alluring about that. And so finally he agreed to teach me how to make them, which again is no small thing because there's so much that goes into just this one little basket when you're sourcing every single piece of it and creating every single piece of it. So I really just completely fell in love with the whole process, especially just there's something about the pace of it that kind of illuminated for me my own the kind of like background static of the cultural stories of everything has to be fast, everything has to be efficient. If I don't master this immediately, it's worthless, whatever. So this kind of flushed all of that up to the surface for me, and just let me experience a different way of being with it, which is one that's like very slow and very painstaking and takes a lot of time. And, I've only made I've made 5 of them, and I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours doing it, and I'm just scratching the surface,
Scratching the surface of
basket making.
How to do it?
Yeah. Every single one has felt like a fluke. I'm like, I'm so lucky that this turned out how it did because I don't know.
Huh. So it sounds more like a creative process where something emerges.
Something emerges. Yeah.
Yeah. So back to this idea of the future. I mean, your generation is the first one to grow up with this whole existential climate change and or the insect apocalypse and or, there's a lot of things sort of lurking around that story. And I think that the options include fully going into the story and becoming the account executive for Nike and just pretending as if things aren't really how they are, right? You have to go through a certain level of denial and ignoring the data, or you have to try and figure out how to live with it.
Yeah.
And make peace with it in some way or something.
Yeah.
Right? Where do you fall on that?
It's definitely changes day to day. I go from total grief at seeing way less butterflies than I remember seeing when I was a kid, to just grateful, grateful for the world that I get to live in and that I get to live in a way that feels much more related to the natural world around me, that feels more honest with just who I am. But climate change is it's a huge one. Honestly, it's really scary, and I think it's like you don't know nobody my age seems to know how to handle it or face it or respond to it. I mean, I feel like it's so easy to get just demoralized and depressed and paralyzed and like, the fuck am I supposed to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
How do I respond? I'm just one little person. What do I do? You know? And that's why I think climate change is one thing that makes the whole story of, well, just save up for retirement and keep trucking along at business as usual, just makes it feel like so like dissonant to the reality that we're actually in.
Well, it's insane making, right? Because they're two separate, not even parallel, not even orthogonal. They're completely different narratives. One narrative is, we need to get the economy growing. You need to get a job. You're going to have to, go into debt to get an education or buy a house. You have to do all of this, which is all participating in this system that we know is destroying the very thing that the system needs to exist.
Yeah.
So how do you get super excited about participating in this system, which is doing this over here? It doesn't really square up very well as a story.
Yeah. It doesn't. It doesn't. And I think it's just it's getting to the point now where it's, you kind of can't ignore it. Like, do you have that sense too, that it's, this type of awareness is and spreading?
And so I get dinged a lot by people who say I should make climate change more of a central focus of mine, and I don't do it because what I care about is leading people to insights that lead to action. Mm-hmm. And climate change violates several of the precepts we know about humans. So humans are really clever at some things. We're not that awesome at other things. So we don't do that well with statistical arguments, right? We don't do that well with things that are distant, right? People will jump in this recency or nearness bias. Like if you see a kid fall into a canal, 99 out of 100 people jump in and pull it out. You hear about a kid starving in Africa, 1 out of 100 sends, the $1 a day or whatever is required to sort of maybe address that. That makes it tricky. And then the hardest part is that your local experience is going to be different, right? So if you told me here living in Western Mass this summer that climate change is going to bake the earth, I'm going to say, no, we had probably one of the coolest, wettest Julys I'm aware of, right? We only hit the 90s a couple of times, but we were typically in the 70s or 80s, So that all those things tend to militate against people actually taking action around it because their daily experience, like if every day you woke up and it was just too hot, right? Now it's an easier story to talk about, but because it doesn't work that way, it's a chaotic system. It's very hard to show most people, a chart where this line is bouncing more or less upwards.
Right.
For
You're
the
not
past
going to
20
get
years.
inspired to make life changes based on graphs or numbers.
Particularly not if it involves actual changes that are going to be experienced by our reptilian brain as loss.
Yeah. Well, see, that's why I'm really grateful that you and Mom sent me to those nature programs so young, and I could really start. Nature went from this wall of green to oh, that's an individual plant and I can use it for that and I can eat that and that's medicine for this, and and it really, when you build these relationships with the plants and the animals and the trees and you actually get to know them, it's easier to track those patterns over time because you actually know what you're looking at, so I think it does make climate change that much more real when I'm like, no, I haven't seen, hardly any monarchs this year compared to the year before that, compared to the year before. Right. So it's when you start to be able to know what you're paying attention to, it makes it feel more near and more real and more immediate.
Yeah, and there are other things that are more near and immediate for me. Even though I think climate change is a big sort of slow lumbering thing that's going to really bite us badly. But there's things before that'll probably bite us first. And the insect apocalypse is a big one for me. Because I just sort of have that, like Boromir said, one does not simply, in The Lord of the Rings, one does not simply take out the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah.
Right?
I know.
We can't predict what's going to happen next, but I see it in the birds that aren't here this year. The bird count is way down. I mean, we have the local residents. There's chickadees here, but everybody's down a bit because the birds eat the insects, right? And the insects are really decimated even here, I live in probably one of the wildest areas of Massachusetts, where the next thing over, just up the road, is the largest contiguous remaining wilderness area in all of Massachusetts,
Yep.
4 square miles. So we should have relatively low pressure from whatever it is that's causing the apocalypse, if it's neonicotinoid pesticides. But whatever it is, it's very real.
And it's still impacting, I mean, everything, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't affect the thing at the bottom of the food chain without it just rippling everywhere.
Through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's going to be one of those stories like, for want of a nail, a shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of the horse, the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the battle was lost in the kingdom, right? So because of that nail being lost, right?
Nice
So it'll
job.
be something like that. It'll be something like that where we're like, why are these brown fungi all over our crops this year?
Right.
And by the time we unpack it, it'll be, well, because you needed this nematode to eat this thing in order for that not to do this, but because that wasn't here, it'll be something like that.
It's right. It's all of these intertwined, very complex, very subtle, often systems, and you just like put one thing out of balance or one thing out of place, and who knows what the ripple effects are going to be. And I mean, we're seeing those, and I feel like we have been seeing those
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah.
So why do you think that hasn't led to some sort of like larger change when we're seeing this
So
story play
it's
out?
hard to get a good organizing principle for this. And as you know, I'm very much not religious, but I do find that I can learn from almost any area. And there's a lot of truth contained in some of the religious metaphors and stories. And one of them is around this middle-aged description, is where it first started coming in, of Mammon, one of the chief minions of Satan. And Mammon is the undergod of the underworld, who convinces you that money is real and convinces you to waste your life chasing shiny things. So it's really it's money. And so I wrote a whole article called One Step Removed, which shows that if you just give humans one step removed, that's all the daylight we need to do some really morally questionable things, right? So one example of that is the case of Aaron Brockovich movie. Julia Roberts is in it. It's a real story about a woman who fought PG&E because they were dumping this hexavalent chromium into wells. It got off-site and came into people's water supply and was creating cancer in children, right? One step removed. Hey, we put this stuff down here in the well, and the engineers did that. Not a single one of those engineers would have taken some of this and poured it straight into a kid's cereal bowl.
Right.
Not one of them.
Right. Removed just enough.
Just enough.
Yep.
Money gives us that same one step removed. People will do a lot in the name of money. Oh, well, profits, I'm Monsanto, I have to. I'm Bayer, I'm Syngenta, I need to make these neonicotinoids. Farmers make a few extra bucks because it's just easier. Oh, my God. I think that's it. I think it's just we're chasing money, and it's one of the oldest... we're really just living up to things that historically, biblically, through all sorts of religious texts, they say, yeah, it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
You get taken off track. I think it's money.
Yeah.
So we live in the most abundant world possible, and people live with a profound sense of scarcity. And some of the people I know who have the strongest sense of scarcity are centimillionaires.
Right.
These are people with a lot of money, but they're desperately afraid of losing it, of not having more. They don't have as much as the other person. It's weird. We live in the most abundant period of time. I'd love to hear you talk about gratitude, because we can have a lot of gratitude
Yes.
for living at probably the easiest, most wonderful time in all of human history, and yet
Oh my God. Yeah.
most people experience it as profound day-to-day scarcity,
Yeah.
which is weird.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that's just the cultural narrative that just seeps in through families and through parenting styles and through the school system?
And through our collective consciousness marketing programs,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
Which, we have that collective hysteria happening right now,
Yeah.
right here. So this is the end of August 2021. We're recording this, but right now, this sort of vaccinated versus unvaccinated hysteria that's sort of come up is now completely detached from the underlying piece, which is that if you're healthy, you have a 99.98% chance of surviving this. Where did that 0.02 become so terrorizing to people? Which is just life, by the way. I hate to tell people this, but being born is 100% fatal. Eventually.
Right.
Comes with a 100% fatality rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. So it's just part of life, but we've divorced ourselves from life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're speaking to in your farm and the nature connection is that's a reconnection to life,
Yes.
where sometimes shit happens.
All the time shit happens. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember, do you remember how old I was when we did the first turkey slaughter?
Well, we were in Mystic, so that must. Oh no! We did that in Bernardston.
So 8,
Yeah.
maybe. You know, so I grew up around death, you
Mhm.
know, and like getting to see like all of the messy, hard, like painful parts of life that I'm glad I wasn't hidden from. I remember
You must have been 8 or 9, because I think
Yeah.
the way I remember that story more clearly is because of Simon.
Yes, please tell that story.
So we'd been watching Monty Python, right? And Monty Python has this one part where in one of the movies where there are these monks who walk around and go Om Namah Shivaya, and they hit themselves on the head with their little monk boards, right?
Mhm.
It's a Monty Python
Mhm.
skit. It's a lot of fun. So your mom and I were over there, we were processing a turkey, and all of a sudden Simon bursts out crying, and we look over, and we had to piece it together because he had a dent in his forehead.
The
and
L.
He had
The
a
L.
dent from the corner of a very heavy cutting board. And he just...
Just doing some role playing.
Just some role playing.
Just he was really getting into character.
He just...
Method acting. Yeah.
So I can clearly remember him crumpled over 5-ish.
Yep.
So that puts you at 8 or 9, right?
Yep.
Depending on where we are in that story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Something like
All right,
that.
so what about the turkeys?
Well, I mean, I was just there were many more slaughters after that. I mean, honestly, it was the chicken slaughter day was one of my favorite days because we would all just get into work mode. We would just get into this rhythm, this flow. Me and my sister would get into like who can get the chicken faster competitions, and it was this really, I mean, it was. There's always like grief when you're ending animals' lives. There's always grief when you're actually like in relationship with your food and seeing the messy details of it. But there was also just this like joy and connection and play that came along with it too. Yeah.
Can't remember why we started with the whole chicken thing. I just like doing things for myself whenever possible. Right? So that was just always part of life, was build something if you need it, fix it if it can be fixed, grow it yourself if you can. And I was on that vibe way before I started. That's just kind of how I'm constructed. So now I'm
Yeah.
glad that we did all of that, given where the world is. And once I had an organizing framework for the world, I was like, oh yeah, this seems like a good idea. People maybe ought to know how to do these things. You know,
Yeah.
should an actual one. But I now realize that, you know, part of my story of self is that I was running from something for a while. I was sure that the economy was going to collapse. I didn't realize the level of insanity they would bring it to. I was sure that the systems were more fragile than they were.
Yep.
But now that I'm here on this side of it, you know, with my own cows and chickens and pigs and things like that, I would run towards this life because I like what it teaches me, and I like the grounding, I like the connection of it. I think that's what this whole story has to be about for this next arc, is that I just think we're out of balance as a species. We're just out of balance. Out of balance with ourselves, out of balance with each other, out of balance with the natural world, just out of balance. You know, Hopi prophecy sort of nailed this a long time ago. Kind of scarcity is the word for life out of balance.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, you guys are going to have you'll have an experience with that. Probably not until, what was the prophecy? Not until after you've poisoned the last river,
Yeah.
eaten the last fish, you know, killed the last buffalo, done what you're going to do. So they saw us as locusts. And then we'll do what all organisms do when you finally run out of resources, which is go, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is we're operating on this story of unlimited everything, unlimited growth, unlimited resources. And that is just not true. That is just not how the world is. And so that, I think when you start to live this kind of like I think of the word smaller because it feels like the concentric rings of my life just have gotten a lot smaller with this lifestyle. Of like a lot of my food is coming from 50 feet from my front door, and obviously I'm not like a Puritan. I don't think you really can be these days.
No.
You know, of course I'm guilty of, I drive cars and whatever. But just having that like smaller, it's like when you know where everything's coming from, you also learn the limits of it. Like you learn limits when you're getting your hands dirty and building things for yourself, and you learn your limits and you learn the limits of the place that you're in. And that is very contradictory to the kind of cultural overstory of limitless everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say I'm really glad I don't have to make a living as a farmer because I'm not that good at it. It'd be really hard.
It takes a lot of work.
It
takes a lot of work, and I am not, by the way. Just make that clear. Not a farmer. Not
right.
making my living as a farmer.
Yep.
I love it and respect the people that do it.
So you're teaching kids now.
Yep.
At least in part, the outdoor programs.
Outdoor programs. Yep.
Have you noticed any change over the years in terms of how kids are showing up in terms of skills? Or I'm thinking about the screen time. Let me just tell you this: when there's two classes of kids who show up here because we have people from the local community we otherwise come through, and some of them know how to be in their bodies and use them, and many of them don't. And it's pretty profound.
Well, so there's a huge, I've noticed major differences in the kids that show up. So most of my programs, the kids are homeschooled because they're run throughout the school year on school days. So most of the kids that end up showing up are homeschooled. And I feel really lucky because most of the kids that are in those programs had older siblings that grew up going to these programs, who had older siblings who went, and they kind of have absorbed a lot of the kind of subculture of the group, just by osmosis. And so that means that they show up with a totally different ability to listen and pay attention and kind of know, like there's a lot of these kind of small, I don't know, rituals or like routines built in throughout our day. So we start our day with gratitude. We end our day with some sort of story from our day. When we're entering the forest, we'll like pause and stop at the edge of the forest and just stand there in silence for about a minute. And that's like pretty impressive to do with a group of like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, that they will, and they lead it, they'll stop before I tell anybody to. They'll stop, so they kind of already have that ingrained in them. And then in contrast, I do a few programs, or I've done a few programs that have worked with school kids, and they're coming to us straight from school. They're completely wired. Like most of the day is just like, let's play the most intense running game we possibly can, because you just have so much steam built up. We're not going to be doing like these long complicated storytellings. We're not going to be doing these like very detail oriented crafts. It's where we just have to literally run you, so there is definitely a big difference. Yeah.
So this was another part of the story of your life that just came up this year was you were diagnosed with cancer. Are you willing to talk about that?
Sure. Happy to.
So I remember the day I was out in my field, get the call from you. You said, Dad, I've got cancer.
Yep.
And tears. Cried.
Yeah.
Cried.
I don't think I'd ever heard you cry like that before. Yeah. It was very moving.
And then there was a scramble to sort of figure this out because the system of sort of conventional medicine says, come on in, we want to just slot you right in, get a port installed, we got chemo and all of that.
And I did end up doing that.
Which you did end up doing.
Yep.
But first there was some getting a team together and figuring that all out. And then there were a few alternative things that you were on as well. So let's cut to the chase. That was, the diagnosis was back in September, October.
October 1st.
October 1st was the actual readout, which was stage 4 Hodgkin's,
Stage 4, yep.
which means above and below and bilateral.
Diaphragm, yep. Yep. Which is, I will say, it's different for blood cancers than it is for other types of cancers. Like a stage 4 diagnosis with a hard tumor is very different. With lymphoma, I mean, the cure rate doesn't change that much depending on the stage. So I got lucky. I got the poster child of curable cancers. You know, they call it the good cancer, which, like, fuck that. There's not a good cancer, but but they call it that, and I understand it. You know, least bad. So there was a big, like, okay, how do I want to approach this? And I think had I had a lesser stage, I might have approached it in a different method, but at this point it was just like, all right, we just got to get in there, you know, clean this up as quick as we can, which turned out to be chemo. So I finished that on May 11th, a couple months ago.
You have hair.
I do. I have hair.
You have eyebrows.
I have eyebrows. I have eyelashes. My doctor said I was only the second person he'd seen go in 30 years of treating patients to come out with hair at the end of it. So thank you. Very lucky.
And as well, you were on a lot of complementary things as well.
Yeah.
What else were you taking?
Well, oh my God. I'm still taking like 2 fistfuls of supplements every day. I am a pro at, I can literally swallow like probably 12 pills at a time right now. I'm literally not kidding. I could probably swallow like a whole egg. I haven't tested that out, but I probably could. Like,
all right. What's in this pile of pills?
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff. There's green tea extract, selenium, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin B. What else is in there? Niacin. There is
niacin. Are you taking the flush niacin?
Taking the flush niacin. So the first few days where I was a little sweatier than normal, but I think I was lucky to not have as strong a reaction to it as other people have. And she also had me doing this. She had a very holistic approach. So she had me doing things like, breath work to like calm my nervous system down. She had me doing all these like visualizations and stuff while I was getting my chemo. She had me, exercising and drinking just like so much water, a ridiculous amount of water. So it was a very well-rounded approach that I think made it, I think I got through it about as easy as I possibly could have.
I remember speaking with your first sort of very traditional oncologist. So you had a whole team. You had an oncologist, you had a naturopathic oncologist, and there were other sort of like add-ons into that whole thing to give you the overall support. What I liked about the naturopathic oncologist, she didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to take her down this other path." She said, "I'm going to work with."
We're complementing.
We're complementing.
Yep, exactly.
It's not instead of, because the data's pretty strong for the chemo response of these types of Hodgkin's.
Yep.
To the chemo, but in that larger process, I remember your first oncologist just straight up was I remember I have a disqualifying question, and she failed it right up front. I said, "What are your views on nutrition?" And she said, "Oh, we think they anything they can do to eat." I said, "Ice cream? Oh yeah. Pizza? Oh yes." I was like, "You do realize that 20 years ago they solved this question for Hodgkin's and many other cancers, that what you eat is actually really important, but that this medical system, practiced state-of-the-art as it is, still doesn't have a position on nutrition," was disqualifying to me for that person.
Well, I'll play devil's advocate here, though, because I did see other patients that were going through the same type of chemotherapy that I was going through, and they were like the type of nausea where you literally cannot get food down, and so they were rapidly losing weight, even though they were on kind of steroids and other drugs to kind of combat the nausea. But they were just losing weight so quick that the nurses were like, "You just need straight up calories," Okay. So in that case, it was like,
I have a bias though, because you came into this so healthy because of your overall eating patterns.
Yeah.
And just general state of health, that that's part of the explanatory reason for why. it was an easier run for you than those people, I would say. But to me, if your nutrition comes in poor, like you're on a
Yeah.
standard American diet, you're sad, right? You've got a high fructose sort of like metabolic disorder.
Yeah.
I think then I could see that. You know, they say, well, for these people, they just need calories. I guess anything will do,
Yep.
so they don't fully waste away.
Yeah, no, and I do think in the larger context, like it's so obvious to me that I cannot believe it's not more of a topic in your medical training. Like I think it's like I've read it's like a 2-day kind
Yep.
of course on nutrition, which is like no, that's how we literally build our bodies. Like you would think that may have something to do with health.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. Oh, it's just, it's bizarre that we're this medieval still about nutrition. Because,
Very archaic. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because there's a lot of data out there, but this was a real eye opener for me. One of the things I did was download the Moss report, which I loved.
Yeah, that was great.
It's 400 pages about Hodgkin's. I guess maybe 20% of it's about Hodgkin's. The other 80% is probably common to many cancers. But what I loved about the way the Moss report breaks it down, so for anybody who has cancer, I would highly recommend you get the Moss report and just start reading, because what this Dr. Moss guy does is just very logical. Said, here's what we know, here's what we sort of know, here's what we don't know.
Right.
Red, yellow, green.
Yep.
The green stuff, for sure, we know correlates really strongly with better outcomes. Yellow, there's some data we'd like to know more. Red, this stuff either works, doesn't work, or is proven to be harmful.
Right.
Right. And so that helps sort of parse through that, because it's a real bumpy landscape when you go out there, because you get these anecdotes of people who say, you know, I licked butterfly wings and I got cured. You know, so.
Oh man, that was my least favorite part about one of my least favorite parts about it was just the everybody had some cure that I needed to try.
Yep.
You know, it's like, well, I'm gonna go with the chemo because it's an 85% success rate and even higher for my age
There was
group.
a little bit of panic your C involved in that story at the front end too.
That's true. I did that for a little bit, but I have to say, like, chemotherapy, when it's used in the right context, and this was it, I mean, it was kind of ridiculous. Because I originally went in because I had these lymph nodes that were swollen and just weren't going away. So I went and got them checked out. Doctor was like, ew, let's take a biopsy. And then we went from there, and I could not believe how quickly it worked, the chemotherapy. The day after, they had shrunk by 30%, literally, like that
It's
quick.
a very responsive
I was
cancer.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is working. Glad.
That's cool.
Very glad.
Yes.
So, but I do think, you know, because most people, when they're getting this type of chemotherapy, it can be a nightmare. I've read, you know, there's like a subreddit for this particular type of lymphoma, and was reading other people's stories that totally freaked me out before I went in. I was like, oh God, I'm going to be like on my back for 10 days out of the 2 weeks between treatments. I'm going to lose all of my, like, everything's going to taste metallic. I'm losing my hair within the first month. You know, I'm going to get mouth sores and all of these awful side effects. And I went in, and first treatment, felt like shit the next day, felt like a little better the next day, but, you know, by day 3 I was back up on my feet, and I was like, okay, first one seemed okay, you know, not totally life shattering, and then that just kept happening, treatment after treatment. I was like, okay, still have my hair, okay, still feel energized between treatments, you know, no mouth sores, like I actually feel like normal in between treatments.
What was your diet before you started? Like, even before you even got the cancer diagnosis, what was your diet like?
Well, let's see. Just before treatment, I was eating. I mean, I've always been like pretty darn good about eating organic foods. Most of my dairy at that time was like my cows, or the most of the meat I was eating was from this farm, you know. So and obviously, like, not perfect. I would definitely go to Whole Foods and get my whatever bread or butter, but largely organic, largely local, pretty good, you know. that was why it was like, what?
Well,
When I got diagnosed.
I know.
It's like, what?
You'd been on bone
Come
broth
on.
diets before.
Oh yeah, no, I did the whole GAPS diet.
GAPS diet,
I had
yep.
a partner who had IBS, and we tackled it with the GAPS diet, which is like very rigorous,
It's very
organic, militant.
Yes.
Bone broth and fermented foods and meat and veggies, and that's it, So I thought I had always, and the weird thing is like you think you would like be able to tell when you have cancer. Like I had always had this idea like, oh, I would just feel like off or weird, but I didn't. It was so weird. I was like, I feel great. Other than these lymph nodes, I'm waking up with lots of energy. I feel, happy. I feel whatever. And so it was just like a total shock.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa.
Yeah, and we don't, I mean, there's a lot of data to suggest that Hodgkin's and lots of lymphomas are actually environmental. And I do think about the fact that we live next door to that farm.
That sprays.
That just sprays all
Roundup
the time
and whatever else.
Something that smelled a lot like grapes one day. I don't know what that was, but we would smell it because these farmers didn't care if it was windy out or if they were.
Oh no, you would just see these like clouds of it rolling.
They wouldn't care.
Over
Like they would spray when
fields.
the bees were out. Like responsible farmers, such as they are, who are still spraying, will do it at night. When it's calm. When the bees aren't out,
Right.
but these people didn't care. So I wondered if there was something about that because you had such an incredibly healthy lifestyle otherwise. So who knows?
Something like that.
Don't
Yep.
know. So how's it changed your outlook?
Well, it feels like one of those things where like the dust is still kind of settling from it. It really ended only like 2 months ago, so I'm still kind of like getting my feet under me, and so maybe like let's ask me that question again in 5 years, and I might have a different answer. But for now, so when I first, I remember I went into my first chemo treatment, and you're in the chemo ward. There's all of these chairs set up in this room, and there's curtains, but most of the curtains are open, so you can see the other patients. And I saw these T-shirts, like fuck cancer and I'm gonna make chemo my bitch, like all that kind of messaging. And and I remember seeing that and just being like, God, that is just not interesting to me. Like I understand it, I totally understand it. Hard things happen, and it's just like, fuck that sucks. That's real. And that mindset just was like like that's not the energy I want to like live my life with. Even with something like cancer. So the approach to it was kind of like, all right, there's this like, I don't know, entity or like being that's in my life for a little bit. And so the approach was more like, okay, who is this? Who are you? What, like, is there something to learn here? Is there something to pay attention to that I'm not paying attention to? And I remember when I first got diagnosed, I was just in a wave of shock and fear and just like, oh my God, how do I even approach this? And I had this man pop into my mind. He was someone who I got to know in kind of a ceremonial context, and he was just someone that I really respected for his, and do respect for his, just approach to life and just the grace and the authenticity of his. He was just this like radiant like Buddha in my life, and I was like, I want to ask Daryl, how would he approach something like this? And he's a Dene man who lives on the Navajo reservation, and so I just sent him a text. I was like, hey Daryl, just got diagnosed, panicking, like would just love to hear something from you, and he reached back out and he was like, niece, you're gonna need to call me every single day. I was like, oh, okay. Are you sure? That's a lot, and he's like, no, we need to talk every day. And so we did. And so we talked throughout most of my treatment until I got told that I was in remission. And so he just really coached me on the approach to the cancer itself, but also just in the approach to my life, in just kind of getting out of the black and white demonization that happens when we're in something that's like really scary and hard and painful. It's very easy to get into like kind of victim panic mode, like, of course. But he really helped me just get still enough to get kind of out of that mentality. So thank you, Daryl, if you're listening.
Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Daryl. Really, really, really changed the whole experience for me in a really big way.
And that obviously has potential to impact other areas of
Oh my gosh.
outlook.
I mean, it's everything. It's completely, it's one of those things that's really hard to put to words, because it's just, it feels like something kind of softened in me, or like melted, and I don't quite have the like story for exactly what that was, but just my experience of my life is just, it's like, you know, the scene from Wizard of Oz is popping to mind when it turns from black and white to color. It's like there's just this deep reverence for life that I think I obviously, you know, I had glimpses of it before, but when you kind of have this like reminder of it, you know, I have my like port scar right here. It's this, that'll be with me for the rest of my life.
The port where
the chemo went in. Yeah, and it's just, it's on my chest, and so it's just this kind of constant reminder of like, oh, this all ends, you know, this all ends. And it's like I lost the luxury of like forgetting that, you know, and so, yeah, there's just this like this deeper way of feeling my life that came out of this. Yeah.
Well, I'm obviously thrilled that it turned out the way it has so far, and
yeah,
I guess there's another. You'll get scans for a number of years, and
actually, no, they stopped doing that.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
my doctor was like, you know, I'm actually going in for a checkup in a couple weeks, and if there's any cause for concern, if there's any symptoms or side effects, or if the nodes feel swollen at all, like obviously I'll go in again, but they don't do the like remedial PET scans anymore.
Oh, good.
Which I like, because it's a little freaky when they pull out the suitcase that says biohazard and the nurse is wearing a full suit to inject you. You're like, oh, cool.
It's a little
Great.
radioactive, okay?
A little radioactive. So it's like to like not have to do that every year now.
So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, what's next? What do you tell? I mean, there's so many more stories I want to go into at some point, but I think those are, we have to save those for another time. But how you and your friends get together and create community is an astonishing storyline. And to dig more deeply into even any one of these things, like the basket and the fibers and things,
Sure.
each of those is just a storyline. But
Sure.
But are you? What's next for you as you settle into life in your tiny home with Bessie the cow?
Clover, actually,
Clover.
Dad.
I call all cows Bessie.
I know, she's a Bessie. She's a Bessie.
She looks like a Bessie
That's
too, by
fine.
the way. She kind of does.
I know,
Little horns
she's
and
so beautiful.
her brown.
Oh, she's just the most gorgeous creature. Well, I mean, what's next? I mean, in the immediate future, it's just the daily rhythms of life on the farm. So it's moving the sheep and moving the cows, and you know, all of that. And for me personally, I just started making braided rugs. That's like my latest obsession. So I'm just gonna keep doing that for a little bit.
Using old clothes from Salvation
Well,
Army?
yeah, I just had all these old sheets, and I was like, I'm not using these for anything. And, you know, space in the tiny house is limited, and you have to be very intentional about what you have in there. So I was like, but I don't want to get rid of them, and I like the colors. So I just made one braided rug and loved it so much that now I'm replacing all my rugs with braided ones.
Oh, cool.
So that's the, like, very immediate plan.
Well, if we wanted to put together some kind of a skills workshop, though, or
Oh,
skills
sure,
fair
sure.
where people could come and maybe learn some things. Would you be down for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever people want to learn. Could do some like, people want to learn like fire by friction. That honestly is like maybe the most empowering skill I've ever learned.
Mm-hmm.
And I am, by the way, I know how to do it, but I am not a master by any stretch. It's one of those things where you tweak any one of the variables and it just throws the whole thing off kilter. So you have to do it a long time to learn all those variables.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's doable.
love it, and it's doable. And if people want to learn like the basics of it, it like you said with the shoelace story, it's just so nice to just walk out in the woods and be like, I could just start a fire right here with my boot if I wanted to. So whatever. Basket weaving, I don't care.
Yep.
Fermenting.
Basket weaving sounds good.
Yeah.
Fermenting.
Yep.
Cheese making.
Sure.
Could we make cheese?
Sure.
You just need enough milk to sort of pull it off.
Yeah. No, you absolutely could. Yeah.
Great.
A few hours.
All right. Well, Erica Martenson, so good
Chris
to have you here.
Martenson. I know, it's fun.
Now people have a little bit of a sense of what the household was like.
Little taste.
little taste. There are more stories.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Dad.
And,
Thanks for having me.
Let's do this again.
Cool.